Have you ever been sitting with 3 or 4 people and there's one person who seems to know everything? No matter what the topic is, they have an answer. They speak with confidence, explain things like an expert, and sometimes make their stories sound much bigger than they really are. You listen and think, how can someone be this confident when they clearly don't know that much? There's an old saying, an empty pot makes the most noise. It's not a scientific rule, of course, but it captures a familiar idea. Sometimes the loudest confidence doesn't come with the deepest knowledge, and psychology has a fascinating explanation for why this can happen. It's called the Dunning-Kruger Effect. In 1999, psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger studied how well people could judge their own performance. Their research looked at tasks involving humor, grammar, and logical reasoning. They found that people who performed poorly on this task sometimes greatly overestimated how well they had performed. But here's the really interesting part. The problem may not simply be a lack of knowledge. It can also be a lack of knowledge about your own lack of knowledge. Think about it. If you don't know enough about a subject, you may also lack the skills needed to recognize your own mistakes. You can give the wrong answer, feel completely sure about it, and not realize that anything went wrong. This is where a word called metacognition becomes important. Metacognition simply means thinking about your own thinking. It's your ability to judge what you know, what you don't know, and how accurate your own performance really is. So in some situations, limited knowledge can create a strange problem. The same lack of skill that causes mistakes can also make those mistakes harder to notice. But there's an important correction to the popular internet version of this idea. The Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't mean that stupid people think they're genius. It's not a label for someone's overall intelligence. The original research focused on performance in particular areas and how accurately people judged that performance. And there's another side to the story. People who perform very well can sometimes underestimate how well they are doing. But that doesn't mean that intelligent people always doubt themselves or that every expert has low confidence. Research on the effect and its interpretation is more complicated than that. That's also why we shouldn't treat the Dunning-Kruger effect and imposter syndrome as exact opposites. They involve different psychological ideas about how people see their own visibilities. And now comes the part that makes this topic even more interesting. You may have seen the famous internet graph showing Mount Stupid, followed by a valley of despair, and finally a rise toward expertise. It looks scientific, but that graph isn't the original Dunning-Kruger research finding. More recent researchers have also debated how much of the classic pattern comes from real differences in self-knowledge and how much can be produced by statistical and measurement effects. Some studies have found evidence for a small effect, while others have argued that the classic pattern can be greatly influenced by the way the data are analyzed. So the real lesson is more subtle than the meme. The Dunning-Kruger effect reminds us that confidence and competence aren't always the same thing. Sometimes the hardest thing to recognize isn't what we don't know, but what we mistakenly believe we know. That's why feedback matters. Testing your ideas matters. Learning from people who know more than you matters. And perhaps most importantly, being able to say, I might be wrong, isn't a weakness. It can be a sign that you are thinking carefully. Because real knowledge isn't about having an answer to everything. It's about knowing where your knowledge ends and being curious enough to keep learning. If this video gave you a new way to look at confidence, knowledge, and your own thinking, hit the like button. Subscribe for more science fact psychology and share this video with someone who might recognize themselves in it. Because sometimes one of the smartest things you can say is simply, I don't know yet.